There's an interesting lesson that comes from this week's Parsha. When we take bread and we make hamotzi on the bread, we know that there's a tradition, and it's brought down in halacha, to actually put some salt on the bread. What is the reason for this practice? In fact, the Ramah says, it comes from this week's Parsha, where the Torah tells us, Al kol karbancha takriv melach. On all your sacrifices you shall place salt. Indeed, when the temple stood and people used to bring sacrifices, they would place salt in every sacrifice. So too, in our times, even though we have no sacrifices, but every time we bring bread to our table, we're supposed to have some salt on the bread. What is the reason for this particular custom? That we should have we should have salt on our bread, just like we had salt on the sacrifices. You know, there's a very interesting lesson which comes from this week's Parsha regarding sacrifices. The Rambam, the Maimonides, said when someone approaches the temple with a sacrifices, with an ola sacrifice, he's expressing something which is recessed in the very depths of his neshama, of his soul, and that is ritzonenu lasos ritzonecha. It is our will to do your will. It is our will to do your will. What does that mean? Ultimately, in the neshama of every Jew, the soul of every Jew wants to do the right thing and get closer to God in life. However, unfortunately, many times there are external distractions, which we call, in simple English, stuff. What kind of stuff? All different kinds of stuff like with business, or stuff with health, or stuff with financial issues or emotional issues, all kinds of stuff. But ultimately, it's like an onion. You peel away all the outer layers and you come to the inside. And in the middle of that neshama, that onion, is this burning desire. It is our will to do your will. And that's the idea of a korban, a sacrifice. Korban comes from the word of karev, come close, because we want to bring something that's recessed within our souls up to the surface. And that brings us back to the discussion of salt. What is salt? Salt has the properties in it that are able to extract something from below the surface up to the surface level. That's why we put salt on our meat when we want to take the blood out of it, because it extracts the blood from below the surface to the top. And that's why we put salt on our sacrifices, to symbolize this idea that we want to bring that core belief of we want to get closer to God in our life up to the surface. And that brings us back to putting salt on our bread when we make a hamotzi. And we say, yes, we have this delicious meal, yes, we have this freshly baked bread, but we want to symbolize that core belief that it is our will to do your will when we make that hamotzi. And how do we do so? By putting salt on the bread. That's something to think about the next time someone says, pass the salt. Folks, I think that's a powerful message to internalize from this week's Parsha. Have a wonderful Shabbos.